Hi, I'm Karen Friedman Agniflo, or as my close friends call me, KFA, from Legal AF. If you want to hear about how Donald Trump was disqualified from the Colorado ballot, he is not qualified to run for president, then listen to this hot take where Ben and I, this is Legal AF After Dark, what Popak usually does, but he's busy, he's on trial, so I'm doing them for him. This is the hot take from Ben and my discussion about what it means, why Donald Trump was disqualified in Colorado, and whether it's going to stick or whether he will actually be on the Colorado ballot after all. But as of right now, the Supreme Court of Colorado has decided that he is not qualified to run for president, just like if he weren't 35 years old, or if he had wasn't a natural born citizen or hadn't lived in the United States for a period of time. There's also a requirement to not be an insurrectionist, to not violate your oath that you took to the Constitution. And the Colorado Supreme Court found that Donald Trump, as president of the United States, had a duty to the Constitution, committed an insurrection, and is now not qualified. And so if you want to hear more about the discussion and about what it means and how this will apply and what applies to all 50 states, then stay tuned and listen to Ben and my discussion.
Let's get right into it. Karen, so we're talking about the disqualification order 4-3 decision by the Colorado Supreme Court. When you and I did our last hot take, as soon as it broke yesterday, we, as fast as we could, read that 133-page decision. We read the dissents as well. And I know we wanted to spend a little time reflecting on it as well. You know, we read it very quickly, of course, and I think we gave a pretty thorough analysis. But what do you make of it the day after, and what do you think about the fallout? Where do we go from here?
So this is one that it makes me just go, ugh, because it plays right into Trump's hand that the election was stolen from him. I really just want him to lose the real way. But then, of course, he would lie about that and say it was stolen from him anyway. But, it's just, unfortunately, this is just... there's all these articles today in the paper talking about how this has actually just emboldened him and his base, and it's going to fuel his base to come out in droves, because this is, not putting him on the ballot is definitely tricky. But it's one of those things that you read the opinion and it's a correct opinion. But it's just one of these, I just hope it's the law of unintended consequences. I just hate reading about what people's and the experts' take on this is. Again, this is not a legal analysis. This is just more my how I feel about it. But essentially, this decision, I thought, was extremely well reasoned. I mean, they go on and really talk about both what happened below and what happened in the Colorado Supreme Court. Because if you recall, there was a Colorado lower court judge, Judge Wallace, who held a 5-day trial actually in November and heard testimony from the petitioners. And the petitioners here were registered Republicans or registered independents, so people who are going to be able to vote for a Republican in the primary. And they brought this action against the Secretary of State of Colorado, saying, it's your job, Secretary of State of Colorado, to certify and look at the qualifications of somebody and see if they are qualified to be put on the ballot. And we argue because of, the fact that because of the 14th Amendment, Donald Trump is not qualified because he engaged in an insurrection. So that's what the suit essentially was about. And what the Supreme Court, the Colorado Supreme Court, held was that the election code, the Colorado code that governs elections, allows electors to challenge Trump's status. So they said that was okay. They also held that Congress does not need to pass implementing legislation for Article or Section 3 of the 14th Amendment's disqualification provision to attach. It is a self-executing issue. Number 3, they held that and they upheld the lower courts that judicial review of Trump's eligibility is not precluded by the political question doctrine. But then they get to number 4, and this is where they reverse the lower court. Because again, Judge Wallace held that he engaged in an insurrection, but that the office of the president does not count. It does not apply. And so the lower court judge did not disqualify him from the ballot. So they said, look, this is where they held that Section 3 applies to the president as someone who has taken an oath. And this is where the district court committed reversible error because Judge Wallace found that the president of the United States is not an office under the United States, in quotes, nor is the president. She also found that the president of the United States is not an officer of the United States who have previously taken an oath to support the Constitution. So that's where they reverse the lower court and say he's disqualified from the ballot. They go on to hold that the district court did not abuse its discretion in admitting portions of the January 6th report and did not err in concluding that January 6th was an insurrection. And they did not err in concluding that Trump engaged in insurrection and that his speech is not protected by the First Amendment. They say some pretty powerful language. We don't reach these conclusions lightly. We're mindful of the magnitude and weight of these questions without being swayed by public reaction to these decisions. We are going to reach it based on the law. Practically speaking, they stayed it until January 4th because January 5th is the deadline before which the Secretary of State needs to certify the contents of the presidential ballot. However, they had put a caveat in there that if Trump goes to the Supreme Court before the stay expires on January 5th, then the stay shall remain in place and the secretary will continue to be required to include him on the ballot. So of course, Trump is going to file with the Supreme Court. And so Trump will be on this ballot. So in some senses, it's for naught. Both parties appealed, the lower court decision, and this is where they ruled. So if Trump goes to the Supreme Court, I'm sure this will be stayed and he'll be on the ballot. The very interesting question that this case posed hypothetically to me is, at the end of the day, it kind of all, it was a very long opinion that talks about every section that I just talked about in detail, but really the only part that I think is worth repeating and really to kind of look at is this issue about whether or not he's qualified, right? And they talk about how the Secretary of State will look. A person has to certify that they're qualified, and they have to say things like, I'm a natural born citizen. I'm over 35 years of age. I've lived in the United States for over 14 years. Those are the 3 major things that would disqualify you from running for president. And those are the types of things that the Secretary of State looks at. The dissent, however, and there was 3 dissents, there were 3 different judges who dissented, basically said, look, those are very objective things that you can kind of look at, right? Those are either you're 35 or not. You were either born here or not. But whether or not someone engaged in an insurrection, and whether or not this whole issue of whether he's qualified based on these factors here, they think that it's a bridge too far. It's not within the scope, and it's not that straightforward, and that's not appropriate. That the Colorado law that allows you to do this does not apply here. So it was very interesting. The bottom line is the Supreme Court will hear this. And, this is the kind of thing, though, if hypothetically, if the Supreme Court were to uphold this, that would apply to all 50 states, right? Because you're either qualified or you're not. It's not just qualified under Colorado law. You're either qualified or not. So if they uphold this, I think this would apply to all 50 states. I think they're not going to uphold it though. So, but I give them a lot of credit for trying. What do you think? What about you, Ben? What is your day after thoughts?
Law and order means law and order. I am sick and tired of Donald Trump shredding apart our Constitution and our laws, getting every benefit of the doubt. We'll talk in a little bit about this absolute presidential immunity claim, saying that former presidents can assert that if they commit crimes and try to have coups and overthrow democracy, that they are entitled to king-like immunity. And we, the people, are supposed to just sit back and be like, well, that's an argument that he can make. But when a Colorado Supreme Court looks at the plain language of the Constitution, remember, these Republicans, state rights, strict textualists, when you then apply those concepts in the most obvious way, these are actually not complicated issues. I know courts want to overcomplicate them. If you look at what the 14th Amendment Section 3 says, and you just believe that words have import, and we apply common sense about what happened on January 6th, this is actually not a difficult decision to reach. I know from the standpoint of the fact that you have someone like Donald Trump who's trying to destroy our democracy, and he runs this MAGA movement that's this fascist thing, and he talks about immigrants poisoning the blood and all, and that this is a Hitler-like candidate that we're supposed to go, how can we help this guy? How can we help this guy? That's why, Karen, all of those expert takes that I knew they would happen, the deluge of them, right? They would rush to say, why is this good for Donald Trump? Yet if there is a booming stock market and wages are up and President Biden gets inflation under control and the other economic metrics are doing good, like unemployment is down and good job numbers every month and 40,000 infrastructure projects across the country, how is that bad for President Biden? And frankly, that's why people, I think, are leaving legacy media and are just saying, enough, these takes, these people are idiots. These people aren't experts at all. And they're coming to places like this to say, can you just not do that? And can you, Ben, Karen, Michael Popak, and the team, can you just read us what the 14th Amendment Section 3 says? Because we could read, we know what words mean. Don't treat us like babies, treat us like adults. We know what law and order means. So when you read the 14th Amendment Section 3 disqualification clause, it's very clear. It says, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Against the same, meaning engaging in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution. And when Donald Trump makes arguments like, oh, I never took the oath to support the Constitution, or that the conduct on January 6th is not an insurrection. I mean, the American people, and you're actually seeing, and I don't want to, cite polls this or polls that, but, I think where the American people are at, like, no, you know what? The Colorado Supreme Court made the right decision. And I think the American people are not looking at these kind of weak armchair experts who want to say, wah, wah, wah. I think what they want to look at is law and order people who go, that's what you get. This isn't a bad precedent. Don't run freaking insurrections against our country. And this is not going to happen to you. Very simple. If you don't want a ruling like this, don't commit insurrections. Don't do what Donald Trump did on January 6th. Don't pal around with terrorist organizations like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. It is a very simple solution if you don't want this to happen to you. Karen, to your point, what is the United States Supreme Court going to do? It is, as I said in the intro, it is a 6-3. It's a 9-justice court, 6 pretty far right-wing people. Roberts, right-wing, traditional right-wing, but a pretty far right-wing guy. But compared to Alito, Thomas, and Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett, and Thomas, and that crew, 6 of them, and then you've got 3 Democratic appointees. Ketanji Brown Jackson, you got Justice Sotomayor and Kagan. So what do you think they're going to do on this type of issue, where I think it will be different than what they will do on absolute presidential immunity? Unfortunately, if I have to be a predictor of what the United States Supreme Court's going to do, I think they will do the wrong thing. And they will either stay this ruling kind of indefinitely, or they will overturn. I just don't have great confidence that the Supreme Court will affirm this ruling like you, just because I don't put a great deal of weight into them on an issue like this that I don't believe is novel, but that they will construe as novel. But I think they'll take a different approach on the issue of absolute presidential immunity, which they have, I guess, a more traditional, developed view of. And just one final point that I'll make on this topic. Why is the United States Supreme Court even being involved in this in the first place? Because of federalism. Ultimately, the supremacy clause of the Constitution states that the United States Supreme Court, on the issue of the application of federal law, our Constitution, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that is where, if there is a federal understanding or federal interpretation that differs from the interpretation of a federal statute from a state court, that is where the United States Supreme Court can intervene. The United States Supreme Court can't pick apart like state statutes or that aspect of the case, even though the Supreme Court in the past sometimes has tried to couch state rights as federal rights as a way to get around that. But the issue that they are going to analyze is not whether Colorado had the right, not whether it's justiciable, but I think they'll go to what 14th Amendment Section 3 means and the applicability and self-enforcing nature of it based on the timing of this relative to when the election is coming up. So that's kind of my overall analysis. But
if you liked what you just saw or heard, join us every Wednesday and Saturday on Legal AF. You'll hear either from me or Michael Popak or Ben Meiselas, where we will break down the most consequential legal issues that are facing us right now, where there's the intersection of law and politics. Join us and the growing movement of almost 2 million people on the MeidasTouch network, where you're arming yourself with information, you're learning the truth, and you'll make your own decisions, and we'll try to save our country. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.